morning, everyone, and welcome to BANT Student Network webinar series. My name is Matthew Edwards, and today's presentation is Chronic Fatigue Case Study by Barbara Powell. Before I introduce Barbara, I would like to go over some logistics. First, at the end of the webinar, all registrants will be emailed a link to the presentation and the recording. Questions can be answered or will be answered at the end of the webinar, but please ask them throughout the presentation by typing them in the Q&A box in the bottom right hand corner of your screen. Okay, so without further ado, I want to introduce Barbara Powell. Barbara trained at CNELM, graduating with the first group of students from the college in 2003. Since graduating, Barbara has worked with education authorities in the promotion of healthy meals in schools, in a nutritional therapy clinic specializing in weight management, gut and endocrine disorders, and as an academic tutor, module leader, lecturer and program leader for 5 years at the Institute for Optimal Nutrition. Barbara has also run her own clinic since 2003, recently working mostly with CFS-ME clients since her 13-year-old son was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome in January 2008. Her son, who is now 20 and missed much of his GCSE education, is currently in his second year at Cambridge University studying engineering. Barbara fully believes that his achievements have been possible as a result of nutritional therapy and the unprecedented support of his school. Barbara is also Director of Membership for BANT and Acting Chair of the Professional Practice Committee. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Barbara Powell.
Hi, good morning everybody. First time I've ever done a webinar, first time I've actually been involved in one, so hopefully this will work for you all. As Matt said, I have a particular interest in chronic fatigue since my son became ill with it in 2008. It wasn't something I initially thought I would get involved in when I first qualified, but obviously when family issues happen, I think we all become much more embroiled in those health concerns. My son's doing really well, as you can understand from where he is now, not fully recovered by any means, but knows how to pace himself and knows how to live with his condition. My daughter, who is 22, nearly 23, finished university last summer and also has chronic fatigue syndrome. Her etiology is different, but obviously there are some genetics that must play in both of them. So I'm now looking at other aspects of chronic fatigue outside those of which I was involved with my son or many of my other clients, but obviously each case that comes along, and I think this is important to understand, each case that comes along is very different. The etiology of chronic fatigue for each individual is very different, and we must recognise that. Now the case we're actually going to do is a very simple chronic fatigue case. Obviously we only have, well, I'm supposed to do 50 minutes, but bear in mind it might go on slightly longer. So I had to pick what I would describe as a simple chronic fatigue case, but I felt that it would be useful for you to go through with me to understand some of the areas, particularly the use of functional testing, that can be really helpful in trying to unravel somebody with chronic fatigue. So as a reminder, chronic fatigue syndrome, ME, is part of a group of overlapping syndromes, which include a number of other health concerns, including fibromyalgia, multiple chemical sensitivities, Gulf War syndrome, autism, post-viral fatigue, migraine, and many others. Commonly, there will be damage to the gut lining, causing increased intestine permeability, and as a result of that, we'll have increased biologically active materials escaping from the gut into the bloodstream. This increases toxic load, it reduces nutrient base, has a vast impact on the immune system, and all these increased biological active materials can then potentially pass through the blood-brain barrier. It depends on their interaction with various cytokines, causing adverse reactions and particularly influencing the brain. As I said, it's a complex, multifaceted, debilitating disease with a multiplicity of etiology. So as I said, each individual will have a unique case. in terms of their symptoms and also their imbalances. Right, okay. What I wanted to do first of all was just remind you, I mean obviously I'm not clear where everybody is in terms of their studying, but just have a quick reminder of what the NICE guidelines say. So the NICE guidelines say the diagnostic criteria, a diagnosis of CFS should be made after other possible diagnoses have been excluded and the symptoms have persisted for 4 months in an adult or 3 months in a child. In addition, healthcare professionals should consider the possibility of CFS-ME if a person has fatigue with all of the following features. So they include new or specific onset, persistent, recurrent, unexplained by any other condition. So obviously, when such symptoms of chronic fatigue exist, we must rule out that it's not related to thyroid, that it's not related to heart conditions, to lungs, diabetes, etc. So it's unexplained by other medical pathologies, has resulted in a substantial reduction in activity level. And one of the particular things that is quite common with chronic fatigue clients is that it's characterized by post-exertional malaise and or fatigue, which is typically delayed, for example, by at least 24 hours with a slow recovery over several days. So somebody with chronic fatigue may be able to exercise to a greater extent. I remember my son doing something like a 6-mile run when he was quite ill, but he signed up to do for it. I think it was Children in Need or one of those charities, and he did it. Amazingly, he did it. But he then ended up with flu and in bed for about 10 days. He really suffered from it, but it didn't come on that day or the next day. It slowly came on later. In addition to those, we're also looking, NICE also say we're looking for one or more of the following symptoms. So, for example, I won't go through all these, but they're listed on the slide. Difficulty with sleeping, particularly unrefreshed sleep, muscle and joint pains, and cognitive dysfunction. The first one as well also says, and a disturbed sleep-wake cycle. That I came across with one client in particular I can remember, and she actually was up all night and asleep all day, and there was nothing she could do seemingly to get a sleep pattern, to be asleep with the rest of the family and up when they were up as well. So it's recognised on clinical grounds alone. There are no medical tests that can diagnose CFS-ME. It's more a case of eliminating any other reason pathology. The case we're going to look at now was never actually diagnosed as CFS-ME, but you'll see that it meets the criteria for CFS-ME as defined by NICE. In addition, there is also the established criteria for CFS is the Canadian criteria, which you may wish to look up at some point. I can, if you wish, send you a link to that later. And that lists the number of comorbid entities that are recognised to be there with CFS, and they include 3 that we're going to consider with this client, which are Raynaud's phenomenon, prolapsed mitral valve, and Hashimoto's. So as far as the client's concerned, she'd suffered for many years. She was 59 when she came to see me, but when she spoke to me on the phone, I very much felt I was being interviewed. She was particularly keen to find a practitioner with experience with Hashimoto's. Now, my own thyroid gland pretty much doesn't work, and it's one of the reasons why I ended up retraining as a nutritional therapist. Although my underlying etiology of Hashimoto, of an underactive thyroid, is not Hashimoto's. It's actually it's caused by stress. But anyway, that's another subject. But obviously, because my own thyroid gland doesn't really work, although it's not autoimmune, I know quite a lot about thyroid gland. I've lectured on thyroid disorders, and obviously I was able to talk to her with a fair level of understanding and knowledge, and she thought I was worth a try. Like many CSF sufferers, she's been round the houses looking for support from many different practitioners, and had been given shortchanged by her GP. So her presenting symptoms or presenting case was 59-year-old female, 5'1", 13 3/4 stone. So as you can see, she was BMI of 36, which over 30 is categorized as obese. She presented with chronic fatigue, Hashimoto's, and adrenal fatigue. She said she'd suffered from fatigue issues since her 20s, and I think now she's 59, so most of her life, certainly most of her adult life. Doesn't remember a specific event, particularly bad for the last 10 years. She was married, no children, but currently in a new relationship. She's trained as a chartered accountant and had her own practice. However, she had to sell that at the age of 38 due to her fatigue issue, but she's now working on a part-time basis for the new owner. So I put together a timeline, and I'm going to try and hopefully use this drawing tool. If you just bear with me a moment whilst I look for it. There we go. And just try and work our way through this timeline here. So the first issue was that as a young child, she had a lot of tonsillitis. So from the age of 3 to 6, she had tonsillitis, and her tonsils were removed at age 6. At age 6, she started to notice or remembers recalling that she started to have constipation. Then in her early 20s, she was first aware of the fatigue issues. But as I said already, she doesn't remember any particular event that caused those. Sorry, I'm not sure this is going to work. I might have to hold on a bit here or just read it. At the age of 32, she was diagnosed with endometriosis and a mitral valve prolapse. So this is located in the heart, as we know, and may permit a tiny amount of blood to leak through, producing a heart murmur. She was, a result of this, put on a beta blocker. This was prescribed for 2 years. Then the next major event was just a few, I think I might give up, sorry. Here we go. A few years later, at the age of 36. However, at the age of 32, if you just see at the top here, as a result of the, I think this is my, no, right, I'm going to give up with this because it's not working. I think it's down to my Surface Pro. It's can be quite difficult to use the mouse and the clicker, so we'll give up with the arrow. Right, okay, we'll just read it through. I'm sure you can see it. So, as I say, as a result of the mitral valve prolapse, she was actually put on antibiotics from the ages of 32 to the age of 37, which is 25 years, every 6 months prior to dental work, and that's a common thing with anybody with a mitral valve prolapse. Age 36, she had ovarian cysts. These were removed, and she feels she never recovered. She was prescribed donazole, which is a synthetic steroid, which causes a decrease in the size of the endometrial tissue and is often used for endometriosis. Age 38, she had glandular fever. Glandular fever, some experts think, is a form of chronic fatigue syndrome and has certainly been shown to be a trigger for chronic fatigue syndrome, in some cases as a result of a compromised immune system. And we do know, and I'm sure you're all aware, that a compromised immune system is often goes with those people suffering from chronic fatigue system. Then at the age of 44, she had a full hysterectomy. This was as a result of the long history of endometriosis, the ovarian cysts, and also significant period pains, all suggesting significant hormonal imbalances. She was then, at the age of 44, placed on HRT for 6 years, and at the same time, she stopped eating meat and poultry, though did carry on with some fish. She first saw her GP 10 years ago at the age of 49. He signed her off work with mental and physical exhaustion, but she was only actually signed off work for 3 weeks. It's just not long enough. It can take that long for the body just to start to relax, to actually change from the adrenals potentially or maybe being in a hyper response to enable the person to keep going, to hyper, thus allowing themselves to recover. The end result may be increased exhaustion. So a 3-week time off work may see that individual actually feeling symptoms are worse, not better. The GP, like many GPs have done, with a number of people I've seen, put all her symptoms down to depression. As I say, it's very common, and whilst depression may not be the etiology of the condition, it may often be a result. People who have lived with this for years and years and years, who cannot get out of this fatigue, who cannot do anything, cannot even almost get to work or are just getting to work and have no other life outside that, will become depressed. She was put on Prozac, and she was put on this for 3 years, but that didn't help. And then she was put on another antidepressant, which is for anxiety associated with depression. She's not taken either of these now. While she was on the Prozac, she also took, sorry, I can't read it, Mal, 2 mgs for 2 years, which is also used as an estradiol medication, which is used to reduce the menopausal symptoms and osteoporosis. So over the years, she's been on a significant amount of prescriptive medication, some of it quite strong. Eventually, age 57, 2 years ago, or 2 years before I first saw her, the GP did do a thyroid test and prescribed low-dose thyroxine at 25 micrograms. Anybody who knows much about how much thyroxine is diagnosed will understand that that is actually a very low amount. But again, it's quite common. I've seen a number of clients who are on a low-dose thyroxine. This client felt a little bit better initially, again quite common, and then after 2 months all her previous symptoms returned, thus suggesting that her thyroid gland was not the etiology of her fatigue issues. As a result of this, she hasn't discussed her chronic fatigue symptoms with her GP since. Over the years, her GP had taken various blood tests, but these had all been reported as normal. I don't know if many of you use the book, the Dick and Weatherby book, the Blood Chemistry Clinical Laboratory Testing, but I use it quite a lot. And I find it very useful with clients who have had blood tests returned in so-called in the normal range. At the age of 57, she consulted with a private GP therapist who specialises in thyroid glands. He undertook an adrenal stress index test, and that was reported with adrenal fatigue, so flatline adrenal recovery, but normal DHEA. He put her on adrenal support, which included a number of Nutri products. There was a Nutri Glandular Adrenomax, some vitamin C, and also CoQ10. Sorry, my laptop's now logged itself out, so bear with me. Right. She also did a total thyroid screen, identified Hashimoto's disease, because that came back with raised antibodies, although the TSH, 3T4 and 3T3 all came back as normal. So autoimmune disorders are common in chronic fatigue syndrome, as in chronic fatigue syndrome you tend to find elevated immune complexes. Obviously that's the binding of the antigen to the antibody. So these are common in autoimmune disorders, and as I say, raised immune complexes are common in chronic fatigue syndrome. The adrenal stress index test was repeated age 58 and came back with the same results, even though she'd been on some fairly high doses of supportive supplements. The adrenal support, however, was increased, and this included at that time a bioidentical cortisol called Cortef. Just before she contacted me, a further ASI was carried out when she was 59. Improved early morning cortisol, that came up to 14.5. Again, if you're familiar with this test, you'll know that the bottom level, at the bottom normal level of this test for early morning cortisol is 12. She had a low mid-AM, PM, and low DHEA this time, but a normal reverse T3, which was measured together. So although there was a slight improvement with the test, she didn't feel she was getting anywhere, and so started to look for another practitioner and found myself. So when she came to see me, she described 2 types of fatigue. One was a heavy weight, and the other was feels like a vacuum cleaner had sucked all the energy out of her. She said the fatigue was always there, some days better than others, poor concentration and foggy brain. And when the fatigue was worse, she felt tearful, depressed, and lacked motivation. She had days when she was in bed doing absolutely nothing. This was in order for her to function again, and again very common in CFS. This is often described as going overdrawn in the energy bank. Clients need to understand how much energy they do have in their energy bank and only use what is there. But it's very, very common the minute they feel that they have a small amount of energy to think they can suddenly do some tasks that will require more energy than they've got. It's really important to learn to pace, but it can take literally years to understand that. She had an inability to lose weight, and she also had a poor temperature control. The poor temperature control again is a common feature of chronic fatigue syndrome. So when the energy is low, the skin is the first organ to shut down, and this leads to a difficulty in controlling temperature. The body becomes intolerant to heat and core temperatures increase. To compensate, the thyroid is turned down further, and this thus exacerbates the fatigue. Other symptoms included intermittent anal itching, bowel movement which varied, could be hard or soft, or larger and could be hard and small or larger and soft. Prior to 2 years, she had always been constipated. She said she had some bloating and occasional flatulence. There was definitely evidence of dark circles, and she said she thinks she had a small amount of eczema which came and went. Obviously, as we know, the dark circles possibly suggest compromised liver detoxification, maybe some food intolerances, maybe gluten intolerance. She also describes some joint pain in her knees, her fingers, her ankles. She says it comes and goes, but she'd had no tests, nothing to test for rheumatoid arthritis or any other issues. If the microcirculation of the skin is shut down, then one of the major routes of detoxification is lost. This leads to an increased accumulation of toxins and increased damage to the mitochondria, leading to reduced energy and an increase in aching joints and muscles. When the mitochondria in the muscle supply energy malfunction, they produce increased free radicals through pro-oxidant stress and leads to a further inflammatory response. She also described herself as suffering from blurred vision and dizziness from sitting to standing. Dizziness most likely related to chronic fatigue, suggesting that the adrenal response is not strong enough to hold the arterial tension when she stands up. Sorry, I'm just going to take a sip of water. Okay, so her lifestyle and diet. She gets up every morning at 6:15 to walk her dog, but she's in bed by 10 o'clock most days to sleep. As I said, she gave up meat and poultry 15 years ago, replaced this with beans and nuts, and eats some fish. She doesn't eat much dairy. She had a problem with dairy as a child, so when she was in school, kids were given bottles of milk to have in the morning break, but that made her feel nauseous, so she gave up drinking milk, but she was never tested. But she can eat cheese. She craves crisps, dislikes avocado and shellfish, and her favourite foods are cheese, tuna and tomatoes, and she said she would find it hard to give up cheese. She adds salt to her cooking and mainly chooses low-fat. How many times have we heard about people who come into our clinics who have been on a low-fat diet for many years? So for her breakfast, she will have something like porridge with honey and a slice of toast, or on a Saturday, scrambled eggs on toast, or on a Sunday, tomatoes and Marmite on toast, plus a small glass of fruit juice. So most days, with the exception of a Saturday, very high in carbohydrate. Her lunch will be something like a tuna and salad roll, plus apple and tangerine, or vegetable soup, cheese and oat cakes. Again, quite high in carbohydrate. For supper, she'll look for something like a mixed bean lasagna made with spelt, with a tomato and cheese sauce and salad or vegetables, or a whole grain rice with tuna sweet corn and cheese sauce, or corn pasty and vegetables and a tangerine. Her snacks and drinks include water, fruit juice, rooibos tea, crisps, tea cake and butter. So diet high in carbohydrate, and also seems to be quite high in tuna, which is tin tuna. So we'll have had all the essential oils processed out, of course, and particularly increasing her toxic load. So in terms of her medications and supplements, when she came to see me, she was still on the thyroxine at 25 mcgs a day. She was taking the bioidentical cortisol. She was on 2 mgs twice daily, plus 2.5 twice daily. Before seeing me, she was actually on double this amount and had already started to reduce it. She was on nutrithyroid glandular, 5 with breakfast. It's not a supplement I'm familiar with, but I checked the catalogue recommendations, and those are 1 to 3 daily, so she was on a fairly high dose. Another Nutri product, Nutri-Adreno Max, which is a multi-vitamin mineral with herbs to support the adrenals. She was on 2 with breakfast, 2 with lunch, and the catalogue recommendations daily is 1 to 3. She was on a B50 complex, B5 additional, small amount of chromium, vitamin C, time release. Vitamin C, as we know, the adrenals soak up more vitamin C than any other organ in the body, and also an excellent antioxidant. She was also on a small dose of CoQ10 and a small dose of magnesium before she went to bed to help her relax. Her genetic considerations include maternal grandfather lung cancer, paternal grandmother bowel cancer, and her mother had primary lung cancer, primary ovarian cancer, and rheumatoid arthritis. So let's now move on to looking at the matrix. I plotted all this on the matrix. We haven't got time to go through it all in detail, but all her presenting symptoms, anything from her timeline, I've plotted within each of the various functional imbalances. I've considered antecedents, I've considered triggering events, I've looked at her personal lifestyle factors, and as I say, I've plotted it all there. And the result of all that, I've come up with some potential mediators. So the potential mediators I've considered are possible dysbiosis as a result of antibiotics, high carbohydrate, low protein diet, low central fats, long-term constipation, bloating and flatulence. I've also considered possible compromised digestion as a result of the possible compromised or dysbiosis, bloating, flatulence, long-term stress and anal itching. Also possible compromised detoxification, the various drugs she's been on, as well as the regular antibiotics, long-term constipation, high carbohydrate, low protein diet, and hormonal imbalance, which we've seen throughout her life. Also a possible imbalance of the immune response. I put down here maybe a heightened Th2 to heightened Th1 and possible low natural killer cell function related to endometriosis, tonsillitis, glandular fever, and chronic fatigue. So, as we know, there are two main types of T helper cells that defend against different organisms. T helper 1 cells target organisms that invade cells, such as viruses stimulated by interleukin 12, and T helper 2 cells target organisms that are found outside the cells, such as bacteria, parasites, toxins, and allergens triggered by interleukin 10. So, as we know, each of these T helper cells are activated by different cytokines. So in an acute infection, the T helper 1 system predominates, and in chronic infections, it's the T helper 2 system. So there's some suggestion that chronic fatigue patients tend to have an overactivation of T helper 2 cells. So they overrespond to toxins, allergens, normal bacteria and parasites, and underrespond to viruses, yeast, cancer, and intercellular bacteria. The T helper 2 cells then activation suppresses T helper 1, particularly the cytotoxic T cells and the natural killer cells. These are the main defenses against viruses. So the viruses fool the immune system, and the viruses such as viruses like herpes viruses, and they make proteins that mimic interleukin 10, and the immune system then shifts from a Th1 mode, which attacks the viruses, to the Th2 mode, which doesn't. So hence the tendency for chronic fatigue sufferers to have constant issues with viruses. It's not in all cases, and I think we have to be clear. In the States, they actually name chronic fatigue as chronic fatigue immune dysfunction disease, CFIDS. But from my experience, although it's frequent, it's not the situation with every person with chronic fatigue. As far as this client is concerned, we know that most cases of tonsillitis are caused by a viral infection, which she had from the age of 3 to 6. And we're also well aware that glandular fever is also a viral infection, which is very, very common in chronic fatigue syndrome. Regarding the endometriosis, there is also suggestion that this is related to a defect in natural killer cell cytotoxicity function in the ability to eliminate endometrial cells. So findings in CFS patients have shown low natural killer cell activity. Okay, so that's just a little bit of extra I wanted to go through as far as possible immune imbalance response. I've also considered possible poor mitochondrial function in relation to the chronic fatigue, in relation to possible compromised nutrient status, which may be related to compromised digestion and also her diet, low protein. I've also considered, finally, an imbalanced endocrine system, possibly related to Hashimoto's, adrenal fatigue, and the issues leading up to her having to have an hysterectomy. Okay, on this next slide, what I used to do when I first, when I trained and when I first graduated, was put together a flow diagram It's before I started to use all the functional medicine model tools. I think they're both very, very useful, and I think many of us look at things in different ways. So I thought, having done this, I would include it in the presentation, and I've linked together all my justifications for my possible mediators, and yeah, so it's there for you to look at any time. And as I say, you might find this a good way of looking at a case alongside using the functional medicine model. Okay, her symptom rating when she came to see me, this was obviously out of 6, with 0 obviously being as, well, no symptom, and 6 being as bad as you could ever imagine it being. She described her foggy head as 5.5 and her sudden energy drop as 5.5 as well. So my recommendations at this initial consultation was to try and rebalance the diet. And diet, as we must remember, is always going to be our main therapeutic tool. So we needed to increase the dietary protein to help with blood sugar balancing, and this must be the cornerstone to supporting any client with fatigue issues, particularly if the adrenals are involved, as somebody with adrenal fatigue is unable to use cortisol to help them balance their blood sugar naturally. I also introduced a whey protein powder supplement, which is a good way of getting extra protein into a client. With a chronic fatigue client, you do need to take things slowly. You don't know what they might react to, and you don't know what's happening within their body at biochemical level. So supporting the adrenals and thyroid has only had short-term benefits, so we do need to look elsewhere. Adrenal fatigue and thyroid are likely to be a consequence rather than a cause of this client's symptoms and health concerns. However, we don't want to remove the support at this stage, but we do want to reduce the reliance on the bioidentical cortisol. The client had already started doing this, and she was very happy to continue to do so. We know she has an autoimmune disorder, so this suggests a heightened immune response, so always good to check for the gut, to check for dysbiosis, digestive issues and inflammation in the gut. And a number of her symptoms, as we've already said, do suggest possible dysbiosis. We need to remove anything that might be implicated in an immune response, and there's also some signs of compromised digestion, as we've said, with her bloating, flatulence and anal itching. So we agreed that she would start by undertaking a comprehensive digestive stool analysis with parasitology 2.0. So that was the end of the first consultation. She came back to see me 5 weeks later, when she'd completed the stool test. We reviewed the diet first. She had increased her protein. She was having whey protein when she was having cereal for breakfast, or she was having eggs, which she was having more often than just the once a day. She was also having more fish and eggs in the evening, so she'd vastly increased her first-class protein, and she was eating more nuts. She was also including a greater variety of vegetables, including more cruciferous vegetables, which obviously would help support her liver. Her bowel movement, she said, now could be normal for days. However, then she'd be constipated and have no movement for days. So still very not normal in terms of normal all the time, but some improvement noticed. She said in terms of her symptoms, she'd really seen very little change. However, after 5 weeks, with somebody who'd been suffering from fatigue issues for over 40 years, this isn't a surprise. Sorry, over 30 years, this isn't a surprise. She did say, however, that she had the odd better day, and then she started a project at home and then became too tired and couldn't finish it, and then she became even more tired and more emotional by the fact that her energy had run out. So again, we discussed the issue about pacing. We then discussed the stool results. So, I haven't included the parasitology part of the test because it was clear. So if we just run through the stool tests that we've got, the results that we've got here. The pancreatic elastase, although back in the normal range, was non-optimal. Ideally, the pancreatic elastase marker should come back at greater than 500. So with a client with a result less than 500, I would suggest supporting the pancreas with some form of pancreatic enzymes. Gut immunology was all okay. Beneficial short-chain fatty acids and N-butyrate, these were low normal, so maybe some more soluble fibre in the diet would help. But her diet, however, appears to be high in fibre from vegetables, beans and legumes, so we would look instead at the beneficial bacteria. Her pH was high, normal, and factors that have an impact on stool pH include fibre and food intake. Looking at fermented processes as well, bacterial populations, antibiotics will have an impact, and stool transit time. Obviously, you're aware that her stool transit time may be slow, and this may have affected the pH. It's also important to ensure that adequate quantities of soluble and insoluble fibre intake, so oat bran and fibre from vegetables, have been found to be highly effective in reducing stool pH. As her diet is high in these products, again, it would take us to look at her bacterial population. The beta-glucuronidase marker is low normal, and a certain amount of beta-glucuronidase activity does appear to be important for recirculation through the liver of endogenous compounds such as vitamin D, such as thyroid hormones, and also estrogen. So it would be good to actually get the beta-glucuronidase marker slightly raised. So broad spectrum antibiotics can also suppress intestinal microflora, which reduces the beta-glucuronidase activity, and this also reduces intestinal reabsorption of estrogen. Secondary bile acids, pretty normal. Looking at on the other side, the bacteriology, no lactobacillus reported, no E. coli reported. Bifidobacterium is reported as +3, but should ideally be reported as +4, but does show us that we have dysbiosis here. There's also evidence of additional bacteria, but no pathogenic bacteria reported. Just considering the lactobacillus, this obviously produces lactic acid, and this acts as a substrate for other gut bacteria that ferment it to short-chain fatty acids. This may be a reason why low short-chain fatty acids, despite good forms of fibre in the diet. So to sum up, we have possible compromised digestion. We certainly would look to support with digestive enzymes and possibly stomach acid. Low normal metabolic analytes. These all appear to be related to poor beneficial bacteria status and dysbiosis, which we would need to support. So at the end of this consultation, this was what we agreed in terms of her supplements. Obviously, she was still taking the thyroxine at the same dose. At the time of the review, the client had reduced the Cortef to just 2.5 first thing in the morning and seen no major changes in symptoms, which this was a brilliant result. The client had run out of the B complex B5 and chromium, so we replaced this with a multi called metabolic cofactors from Allergy Research. And this formula is designed specifically to help support the body in the utilisation and metabolism of essential fatty acids, which are absolutely key for hormones. I introduced Similase, 2 per meal up to 6 per day, and also Metagest. I don't know how many of you are aware of the stomach acid protocol. Certainly the functional medicine guys talk about it, and it's in the back of a book, which the Natural Medicine Encyclopedia. Mine's fairly old now, so there's 2 volumes, and I know there's a handbook as well, and I don't think this protocol's in the back of the small handbook, but it's certainly in the back of the 2 volume, where you build up to well, with Metagest it's 7, because it's 7 times 650 mgs of stomach acid you can build up to per meal, which is the equivalent of 10 grains of stomach acid. It's a protocol I've used a lot. I found it very successful with a number of clients, those with chronic fatigue, those with other digestive issues. You have to go very carefully and very slowly, and you have to understand and believe in your client that they will follow your protocol, because to take up to 7 stomach acid supplements when you don't need them will obviously cause a lot of issues in the gut, burning issues in the esophagus, etc., etc. So it's a matter of building up slowly. I initially always discuss with the client building up to 4 and no more before we review per meal. Always ensure they build up very, very slowly, and always ensure that if they understand that if they have any warming feeling at all, they'll reduce the number of supplements of the stomach acid per meal. Right, so that's that. So we got her onto the Metagest. I would prefer to change the vitamin C. I'm not keen on time-release supplements because they tend to have a lot of fillers in them. And vitamin C really, I feel should be taken at regular intervals during the day. So I tend to prefer clients to take with breakfast, lunch, supper, and maybe even in the evening before they go to bed if relevant. However, she had high stock, so we left her on this one. I changed the form, the CoQ10, to an allergy research form, which is the reduced form, the obiquinol. And she was taking 2 of those a day. Each soft gel is 100 mgs. I also changed the magnesium supplement to magnesium citrate in solution, which is highly absorbable. I don't know if anybody's tried this or is aware that magnesium in solution tastes absolutely disgusting. And I rarely say to clients that anything does, but this really does, and I didn't want to put her off. So it's unfortunately a supplement that really does have to be mixed with juice. I tried it myself and eaten. Believe you me, you don't want to do it if you haven't already tried. Okay, I then added in Ultra Pro Bioplex from Nutri, which is 600 billion organisms per capsule and non-dairy. When she came back, her symptoms, Sfoggy had the same, but sudden energy drop had dropped to 5 from 5.5, so she did feel a slight improvement. So she came back again 6 weeks later. What I've actually forgotten to say, and I'm not quite sure where that was on the previous slide, or maybe it wasn't. But oh no, sorry, I do apologise. It's on the next one. Just getting myself slightly out of order here. Okay, so she came out 6 weeks later, having put herself on the supplements to support her stool results. She said, noticed an improvement to her bowel movement, not fully consistent and more frequent and better form, which is a great result. She'd had some problems with joint stiffness and pain, more notable since stopping the Cortef completely, and as a result was occasionally taking ibuprofen at night to help sleep. Just to comment on this, if a client is in pain and you only enteral means, then in the short term, taking something to help sleep, such as ibuprofen, may be needed. Sleep is absolutely vital, and particularly with chronic fatigue clients, even if they're going to wake unrefreshed, they still need their sleep. So to have a sleepless, restless night through pain, it is not going to not going to help any other part of your protocol that you're working with. She wasn't taking them every day, and they were only occasional, and they were fairly low dose. So I felt it was better to keep her on these. She certainly wasn't taking any more than she needed to enable her to sleep, and she was only on them for a short period. So as we know, sleep is vital. She was still having problems with her temperature control, eating very little bread, but occasionally Ryvita. And then we discussed the one test. This is what I was thought I'd discussed at the previous consultation. But so the one, I call it the one test, is actually available from a number of different testing companies. I use the one from Genova, which is called the Optimum Nutrition Evaluation, hence the one test, but also only requiring one sample. So it's one early morning urine sample. So it's testing for organic acids and amino acids. So as we know, abnormal concentration of organic acids provide functional markers, neuroendocrine activity and intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So the results of these tests can indicate functional needs for essential or conditional essential nutrients. It can also suggest diet modifications we may need to consider. It certainly gives us indication of antioxidant protection needed and detoxification. We also have the amino acids, and as we know, amino acids are central to virtually every function in the body. And I think, well, certainly when I was training and even when I was working at ION, I'm not sure if the message about the importance of amino acids got through. The importance of protein, yes, but not really looking at individual amino acids. And of the 20 amino acids required for synthesis of proteins, 9 must be derived from diet. And as we know, there are elaborate mechanisms in all cells in the body that result in assembling these amino acids into thousands of specific proteins. And all these proteins, they make up the structures, and they're utilized in every single pathway in the body that produces hormones, neurotransmitters, detoxification, antioxidant protection, build-up of bile for digestion, etc., etc. If we don't have all the amino acids we need, then the body's just not going to function. And we need to understand where the imbalances might be. I had one client, and we did the one test fairly early on. I'm pretty sure it was like maybe even after the first consultation. And And the amino acid profile came back with all the amino acids right down low bottom, so outside range. Digestion. The digestion just wasn't working. We had understanding of micronutrients within the organic acid side, but on the amino acid side, it was very much a case about digestion not working. We then supported digestion along with some other issues, and went up to 7 metages per meal, redid the one test, and the amino acid profile came back with all the amino acids right on the other side of the graph, right on the right, all far too high, because they weren't being supported in the pathways by the micronutrients now. But at least we knew digestion was working. Right, so that was the slight aside. If you take the one test, you may or may not leave your client on a supplement protocol. Sometimes you can't take clients off. There's certain things you can't take them off, or you may already be on a protocol that's working for them and maybe looking further. So often, or ideally, that initial test will be taken with no supplements, and that will give you a benchmark, and then your subsequent tests are taken with the supplements to monitor the effectiveness of the supplement regime you're on. So with this client, I left her on the digestive support because she was already on that, but she came off the probiotics and some of the other micronutrients. We also discussed the opioid effect and the Sunderland urinary peptides test. This is where this was a test developed by Sunderland University within their autistic research laboratory, where they test for the effect of caseins, opioids from dairy and opioids from gluten grains. And it can also indicate, so it's peptides not being digested properly and being released, an effect in the brain, basically. So we talked about this test. It's not expensive. It's about £60. The research people now are ESPA research, if you want to look it up. You may be well aware of this test. But she wasn't keen to do it. It's a simple urine test. As I say, it's about £60 and not particularly expensive compared to the other tests we discussed and agreed. But I think she was not keen to give up gluten completely. And you can't force... Right, I need to hurry up, apparently. Okay, I'll rush on. When I went through this yesterday, it took me 55 minutes, but obviously I'm getting a bit carried away. I've logged out again. Right, okay, so we have the update on the supplements there. I'll leave you to go through that. I've really gone through it. Then 6 weeks later, she came back, and she was doing okay. We discussed the diet, and then we discussed the one test results. This is what I really want to get on to. So we'll move forward. What I do when I look at the one test results, this is an overview of them. This is an old-fashioned look because we did the test before the new look report came in. I put them together by functional area. So, for example, I look at digestive and gut health, all the markers that may be implicated here. So I've got an amino acid marker, I've got a dysbiosis marker, I've got 2, and I've got another amino acid marker. So I look at them together, and it helps me understand from a functional perspective. So histidine was reported as low, and we know that's the precursor to histamine, which is essential for stomach acid. And we know stomach acid is critical for the absorption of a number of nutrients, zinc, iron, B12, folate. So she was already on the Metagest, so it looked like she certainly needed to stay on this and potentially increase further. DHPPA is reported as high. That suggests dysbiosis. It's dysbiosis. These bacteria are anaerobic, and so may not come up in a stool test. So it's adding to our understanding of dysbiosis. Now, the probiotic Saccharomyces boulardii has been shown to be helpful when this marker is raised. However, she's got an autoimmune disorder, and S. boulardii may be compromised as they can heighten the immune response further. So I would look just to carry on with the probiotic support, or maybe a slightly different support to one more, to using S. boulardii. Arabinose is raised, and that suggests that yeast is present. So yeast excrete the organic acid arabinose, which binds to receptors in the body, P5P, lipoic acid, and biotin. As we know, P5P is required to release stored energy. Lipoic acid is a really key antioxidant involved in the production of energy, and biotin is required to work with chromium for entry of glucose into cells. So in essence, you've got 3 different pathways involved in the production of energy which may be affected by the presence of yeast in the gut. So I introduced EcoBalance, which is a 4-product strip, including prebiotics, garlic, cinnamon, and glutamine. So glutamine for trying to heal the gut lining, which we haven't got a result for, but EcoBalance is a very, very good product. We have got a result for glutamine, however, which is low normal. So as we know, the preferred fuel for the small intestines, it makes up 75% of their energy requirements. Okay, then we look at cellular energy. The lactic acid has come back low. However, in the presence of a normal pyruvate, this is not considered to be a clinical issue. So we have a number of metabolites in the citric acid cycle that's reported as low, may be related to lower than desired levels of available amino acids. So compromised digestion of protein may be implicated. So I've suggested you carried on with the whey protein. It's a good way to release essential amino acids into the diet. We have a low citric acid metabolites, may possibly suggest increased heavy metals, but we can look at the detoxification oxidative stress for those. In addition, malic acid has been reported as undetectable. Yeast can mimic malic acid and so may block the chain here. Nutrients to support this cycle include the B vitamins, particularly 1, 2, 3 and magnesium. So I changed the multi at this stage to a multi called Extra Nutrients, which contains good levels of the B vitamins and antioxidants. I also continued carrying on with the solution of magnesium. The bottom marker, HMG, is a lowered or raised HMG result is diagnostic of CoQ10 deficiency. So as this came back perfectly normal, I felt at this time we should remove CoQ10 from her supplement protocol. It's an expensive supplement. It can be useful if you need it, but I think there needs to be a reason to say you need it. And so we took this out, as I was also adding in other expensive and more supplements. On the neurotransmitter metabolites, the first marker here has been reported as low normal, and second as raised. The first one reflects peripheral levels of adrenaline and noradrenaline, and the second one reflects dopamine levels from sympathetic nervous system stimulation. They both require the amino acid L-tyrosine to feed into the pathways. Now, L-tyrosine is reported as low normal, and lowered levels may be the result of compromised digestion of protein, or it may be a compromised conversion from phenylalanine to tyrosine, which we can actually see here, because in relation to each other, the phenylalanine marker is much higher than the tyrosine marker. This can also be useful to identify whether there's a low iron status, because iron is a particular nutrient needed for conversion. Iron also, as we know, needs stomach acid to help to be absorbed. So supplementation of tyrosine may be beneficial. With regard to the neurotransmitter metabolites, we might want to look at P5P, vitamin C, copper. I did add in additional P5P. We've already discussed P5P or B6 when we were talking about yeast. Copper is in the multi I added in, and vitamin C we obviously have already, and I'm changing that as soon as I could. As a result of these markers, particularly the raised homovanillic acid marker, this suggests an increased rate of synthesis, suggesting a chronic stress response that manifests as heightened sympathetic nervous system reactions to stress. So I spoke to the client about the need to introduce stress-reducing techniques. One in particular was just, if she felt she was getting stressed, to just calm herself down, sit with her eyes closed, try to draw herself into herself. It's difficult to explain over the webinar because I really need to be able to see you, or you need to be able to see me, I suggest. But there are a lot of stress-reducing techniques that clients can put into their protocols, and very, very important with chronic fatigue syndrome that they look at those alongside nutritional support. Right, so some neurotransmitter metabolites. So we've got a number of amino acids which have neurotransmitter properties in the brain. Some of these have an inhibitory effect and calming influence, and others have an excitatory influence. So looking at these, it's obviously very important that we get the balance right between them. So the top three are excitatory, and glycine is calming. So I suggested that we put in the amino acid glycine, which is reported to help offset this imbalance between the 3 and the 1. Okay, and then if we look at glutathione, certainly the one test results suggested the liver detoxification systems are compromised. Glycine is low normal, as we've already seen. Glycine in itself is a major phase 2 detoxifier, so we need the glycine in for that reason, as well as rebalancing the neurotransmitter metabolites, amino acids. So glycine together with cysteine and glutamic acid are needed to make glutathione, as we know, with the presence of magnesium and potassium. And this obviously is another major phase 2 detoxifier. So again, supplementing with glycine would be appropriate. Finally, we have a couple of other markers for detoxification and oxidative stress. The saracine is reported as raised, which indicates the impairment of methylation, which we know is absolutely key for a number of processes, including neurotransmitters and detoxification. This could be due to low conversion from saracine to serine. You need folic acid in the form of THF here, and B2, as well as P5P. So in the extra nutrients, we've got riboflavin. We've already added in P5P. The marker specifically for TFT, which is Figlu, FIGL is raised. Sorry, if it's raised, it indicates a deficiency of folic acid. However, this was normal in this client's case. So I didn't need to put extra folic acid in over and above. That was in the extra nutrients. So on the oxidative stress markers, this is raised, the 8-OHDG, and the marker for urine lipid peroxidase is high normal. So these raised oxidative stress markers and obviously indicate an imbalance between free radicals and antioxidants. So we need to add in more antioxidants. So the extra nutrients is very high for a multi in antioxidants. So other markers that may be useful are markers such as lipoic acid. And then finally, as far as dietary considerations are concerned with the test, lysine was reported as low normal, and lysine is a building block for P5P, which we've already discussed in relation to energy, and we've already added in extra P5P. But it would be good to look at her diet in terms of her lysine intake. So grains lack the amino acid lysine, as we know, and legumes lack methionine. So I spoke to her about a better balance with regard to vegetarian protein, and also to further increase her first-class protein from whey protein powder, fish and eggs, which she was happy to do. I know she was on a lot of supplements, but this client doesn't like supplements, so wherever we could avoid them, we did. As far as the eradication of any excess yeast is concerned, we talked about removing refined carbohydrates, sugar and added sugar and dried fruits from her diet. Okay, so this just shows you exactly what supplements she ended up on. The one thing I'm just going to highlight is the L-tyrosine, because she stayed on the Nutri, adrenal and thyroid glandulars until she ran out. What I didn't want her to do is add in the L-tyrosine until she'd done so. And also with L-tyrosine, to not have after midday, because obviously that can heighten increase stressed energy. We didn't want that to happen. It can interfere with sleep. So after that, she was reporting a slight improvement, but not much, so 5 and 5 for both. Okay, so another 8 weeks later, using techniques to reduce nervous energy, still very tired but a little calmer. Weight was beginning to come down. She started on the Utilising. She wasn't setting the alarm anymore, which is absolutely brilliant, because lying in past 9 o'clock, I know most of us can't manage it, is a really, really key for recovering from adrenal fatigue. And she does sleep in the day if she has an opportunity, and she now takes high-protein snacks out with her. She reported improved symptom rating of 4.5 for both symptoms. Another 8 weeks later, she said improving and feels real glimmers of hope for the first time, and not needing to rest all day, every day, which is absolutely brilliant for her. She hadn't had any alcohol for weeks, and then at a celebration she had a small glass and then felt lousy the next day. So she's proved to herself now that she will just stay off alcohol. She came back for a further consultation 8 months later. Sorry, I'm ahead of myself, I think, again. Yeah, so she came back 8 weeks later, and she reported again a drop in symptom rating. She also reported that she had Raynaud's syndrome. She'd never mentioned this before, so we put her on Eskimo Extra at 3 a day. That's shown to be very, very good for Raynaud's syndrome, and also the omega-3 will help with her hormone balancing. And in the meantime, she'd done a TSH test, and her GP had increased her thyroxine from 25 mcgs to 50. I think her results were around 1.3, so not very high, but he was happy to put that up. I think he felt he was doing something to help support her condition. So foggy head and symptom energy had both come down to 3. I'm now going to go on to the consultation we had 8 months after that last one. We had reviewed and revised the supplements throughout the period. She'd also taken the opioid test during that period, and she did actually stop gluten completely. When she came back, she couldn't remember the last time she had to have a day lying on the sofa, very occasionally a nap in the afternoon, and we did actually discuss repeating the one test so that we could review and change her supplement regime based on new results. It's always a good thing to do. You can't leave clients on the same supplement regime all the time. You do need to review, but it was likely that she'd really need some of these basic supplements for some time. She at the time reported her foggy head as 2, and her sudden energy drop was 1.5, and she said, well, really, it doesn't happen anymore. This was 16 months after we first started. I'm really sorry I had to rush through the one test results. But that was really key, yes, to get her digestion right, get her digestion supported, look at her dysbiosis, and also then home in on key nutrients and supporting her oxidative stress processes, and also getting the amino acid balancing right based on those one test results to help her increase her energy supply so that she was then able to go further forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara. That was absolutely fantastic. Some wonderful information for us all there. And I think it's worth remembering that, after 40 years of problems, you can't just fix that in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and it's proof that what has happened over a long period of time has really benefited the client. So absolutely brilliant. We've got some questions. I know we're running a bit over time, but we've still got everyone online, so obviously people are still interested. So if you can, Barbara, I'll just ask you a couple of questions. Can you please repeat the book that you base your stomach acid protocol on, please?
Oh, right. Bear with me a moment. I'll just go and get it. It's the Natural Medicine textbook. It's the Pizzorno and Murray book. It's a 2-volume book.
2-volume book.
Yeah.
What might be very good, I know we're going to be joining the LinkedIn, a student LinkedIn page with questions later on. So at some stage, would you post the details of that book on the LinkedIn page?
Yes, I will, of course.
Fantastic. A lot of people are saying thank you very much, fantastic presentation. Another question is, what determines when you would do the one test? Why wouldn't you have done that earlier?
It's difficult to know, to be honest. I think it varies from client to client. Some clients come with obvious digestion issues, and she to me had obvious digestive issues because of a number of her symptoms, and also the fact she'd been on so much medication over the years and long-term antibiotics. So I felt we needed to start with looking in more detail. Although you get a good results from the one test as far as digestion is concerned, you don't get you wouldn't get sort of individual understanding of parasites or particular pathogenic bacteria. If you have pathogenic bacteria on the stool test, they will also identify which are the best natural and prescriptive agents to use to eradicate it. So with somebody with digestive issues, obvious digestive issues, I would always start with the stool test. Now, it may be, depending on the client, depending on how much money they've got to throw at this, you could do both together as an initial thought. I have had clients who haven't come with obvious digestive issues, and we have started with the one test. In fact, the one I mentioned before, where the amino acids were very, very low, there were no obvious digestive issues at all. Normal bowel movement, it just didn't scream at me that anything was going on specifically in the gut. Now, normally with chronic fatigue, you would imagine things are going on in the gut. It's very difficult to justify a gut test when nothing's going on. When you can do the one test and get a lot of good understanding of the gut within that. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you.
It's difficult to say, but yeah.
Sorry. Another question here is, how long do you have to come off the supplements before taking the one test?
I believe it's 4 days. The labs are always updating these requirements, so I would always say reread the instructions each time, because for years and years and years, the stool test, clients were only advised to come off beneficial bacteria supplements for 3 days, and then a couple of years ago that was changed to 2 weeks because of their research. So I think it's 4 days at the moment, but I would always double check.
Okay, excellent. What supplement did you suggest for Raynaud's?
I added in Eskimo Extra, which is a high-strength omega-3 supplement. I tend to always use the Eskimo range of supplements for clients if I want to look at essential fatty acids. So the research has shown that Raynaud's can respond to high-dose omega-3. We hadn't got her on an omega-3 supplement. I was wanting to, but as I said, she wasn't. She amazed me really in the amount of supplements she took, based on the fact that she doesn't like taking supplements. But because she'd increased her fish, I'd originally left the Eskimo out of the supplement regime. But Raynaud's gave me a good reason to add it in. And that could also help with her hormone balance and obviously her cell membrane integrity, etc. So that's the one I added in for the Raynaud syndrome.
Excellent. What is your preferred comprehensive stool test?
I've tried a few over the years, and I still prefer Genova's. I guess partly it's because I'm so familiar with it. It really doesn't take me long to interpret it. I can quickly glance at it and think, oh yeah, this is what I need to do with the client. Some of the others aren't, the presentation of the results aren't as easy to read, and they're certainly not as easy for the client to read. So there are other markers and other stool tests which have been useful, and as I said, I have tried other stool tests in the year, but I tend to still come back to Genova. But that's just my personal choice, and as I said, maybe partly historical because I'm used to using it.
Yeah. Do you show the client the results directly or just summarize them?
Oh no, I have the client back to see me, give them their copy and go through them with them. And then depending on, with the one test, I actually do write a report, because although the one test comes back with some very good understanding of what's going on, because I like to look at, obviously we all should, the high normals and the low normals, as well as markers that are actually outside ranges, and also look at certain markers in relation to each other, and also, as I showed you there, look at them within the functional medicine matrix. So you're picking out key markers from each of the areas and thinking, how does this relate to digestion, how might it relate to detoxification, etc. I actually do a report for the client. So what I showed you there, I would write up under those headings. I do actually charge for it over and above the cost of what they've paid for the test, so I do charge my time out for producing that report. So with the one test, because of the complexity of it, because you've got 80 odd markers, and for a client to go through those, it's just a nightmare. So I summarise it in a letter form, in words that they can understand, relate it to their symptoms, which I think is always really, really useful, because I think it makes them then more compliant with their dietary and supplement advice. But yeah, I charge for it.
Yeah, thanks. Another one here is the Canadian guidelines for CFS, which you mentioned before. Can you put that link onto the LinkedIn student page for people later?
Yeah, I will do. Yeah, they are useful to have, to look at. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. And another one is, if the client had not already had adrenal and thyroid tests, would you have started with those?
I would unlikely have started with those, because I did feel that, I mean, obviously what I saw suggested I wouldn't have started with them, but I rarely do adrenal and thyroid tests with chronic fatigue clients as a starting point. Rarely. You can, even if they haven't been specifically diagnosed, when you go through their case history, you pick out other issues that say this is more than an adrenal fatigue issue, because you'll pick out all these other symptoms which may be listed on the NICE guidelines or the Canadian criteria guidelines. Once you start getting involved in autoimmune disorders and other gut disorders, as I said, look at the Canadian criteria and you'll see all these other comorbid entities listed. And once you start seeing all those, you know you're dealing with more than adrenal fatigue. Adrenal fatigue may be part of it, but as we saw with this client, just supporting her adrenals hadn't made any difference, and she'd been doing this for 2 years. In fact, in the middle of that, she sold her company because she wasn't seeing any progress. So it's useful to have, and certainly if a client comes with me like she did, it's very useful to have. But it wouldn't be where I'd start. And if you look at the one test, you'll get some understanding of adrenals there, and also of thyroid. By the way, on the tyrosine and the other markers, so you will get some understanding.
Okay, excellent. And lastly, you mentioned sarcosine with regards to methylation and neurotransmitters. Could you elaborate a bit on that?
I'm not sure if I can. Just bear with me a moment. I'll have to come back to you on that in terms of what its exact role is in methylation.
Fantastic.
I'm assuming that's what you want to know. I mean, I can only tell you how I'd interpret the test results, but in terms of the exact role with regard to methylation, I'll need to relook at.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll put that up as a question on the LinkedIn student page as well.
Got me to do some homework.
Absolutely. Well, look, thank you very, very much, Barbara, on behalf of the Student Network team and indeed everyone who was actually on the call, the webinar today. The feedback from everyone has been that it has been a fantastic and very informative webinar, so we thank you very, very much from all of us.
No problem at all.
For everyone else, we will be continuing the discussion on LinkedIn. There is the LinkedIn group there, a link to it. You will get a link to this presentation, so you can easily get onto the LinkedIn Student Network page if you aren't already a member. And for everyone else's information, next month's webinar is Eye Health and Antioxidants by Amanda Elwood, and that is on the 13th of May at 8 p.m. GMT. So again, Barbara, thank you very, very much from all of us, and we look forward to seeing and hearing from our next presenter at next month's webinar. Thank you again for all your time, and we will see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.